Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Xoogler community meetup. I'm so thrilled to welcome Marissa Mayer back to speak to the Xoogler community. For those who remember, she actually came in live to speak to everyone in Palo Alto back in 2018. And fast forward a few years, Marissa is the CEO and co-founder of Sunshine. A lot of you probably remember her that she was the CEO and president of Yahoo. And before that, she spent 13 years at Google. She was the 20th employee and first woman engineer. And for more than a decade, she ran and helped really form such key Google products like Google Search, Google Maps, Google News, and so many consumer products. She graduated with honors from Stanford University with a BS in Symbolic Systems and an MS in Computer Science. Thank you, Marissa, for taking the time to share your insights with this community, and welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me back. I'm excited to be here.
Well, let's start about your story of how you ended up with Google, if you don't mind. Would you mind sharing perhaps your story from Stanford and how you ended up over at Google?
Sure. It's funny, I just told the story to my children the other night. They are just basically studying people's kind of, timelines. So for me, timing is everything, and I imagine it's true for other people on this call. In the summer of 1998, I was an intern at the Union Bank of Switzerland in Zurich. And I was working on collaborative filtering, basically early kind of old school AI. And what we were working on was in the same vein as Amazon. People who bought this book also bought this book. What we were doing was we were looking at web traffic trends. So basically putting something that collected cookies in the browser of different traders at the Union Bank of Switzerland, at UBS, and seeing where they went to try and see if that could be a good navigational guide. The idea would be that, when traders come in the morning, sometimes they don't know, like, why is the price of gold up? Why is the price of oil down? And being able to navigate to that information quickly helps them. And so if there's another trader who started earlier and they went from article A, B, and C, if the later, the trader lands on article B, recommend A and C, and you start to aggregate those patterns over large amounts. And so basically built an app that did that, looked at how to tune the algorithm, how to filter out, overfitting, things like that. I went back to do my second year of my master's at Stanford. I had gotten hired to lecture the introductory programming courses, and my longtime mentor at Stanford was a professor named Eric Roberts. And I went back and he said, well, before we jump into you lecturing this fall, why don't you tell me a little bit about your research from this summer? And so I told him about it, and he said, that's so fascinating. It sounds just like what these two guys on the fourth floor are doing, except they're not using where people go on the web. They're looking at the link structure of the web and doing computations of likelihood. And he's like, it's Larry Page and Sergey Brin. And he's like, I can't remember the name of the company they just started. And I kind of like shrugged it off and just said, I still give Eric to this day a hard time. I emailed with him this past weekend and gave him a hard time that he couldn't remember the name Google. But I kind of said, Eric, no matter, I just got back from Switzerland like 6 hours ago. I'm lecturing for the first time and leading a class for the first time myself. I don't really have time to mess with a startup. And forgot about it. Went on, did my last year, my master's. It was 1999 and Web 1.0 was exploding. Stanford CS was very popular, especially with employers. And I really didn't know what I liked to do. I liked business. I liked coding. I sort of knew if I was going to go into a coding job, would be now, though I might want to evolve into something else. I thought about going to law school. I thought about being a consultant. So I kind of interviewed for lots of different jobs, big companies like Oracle, a little handful of startups, Carnegie Mellon, if I wanted to continue teaching. And in the end, it was 1999. So I had like 14 job offers from all these different sectors. And I could kind of tell what the best opportunity in each type was. So it was very clear to me that Google was the best startup if I went to startups, but it was really kind of hard to integrate across the different genres, and had a long sort of fretful process, but ultimately decided that I was really impressed with what I had seen at Google in terms of their ambition and how smart the people were. And it's funny because I have a matrix. I'm a pretty quantitative person. So I had a matrix of each job and my thoughts of sort of factual things, but also just like what I thought about the company's trajectory, my own personal trajectory within the company, things like that. So I actually have like my estimate that I thought Google had like a 2% chance of succeeding. By the way, in fairness to me, I had every other startup at 0.02%. So it was like 100 times better than the average startup, but I still thought we would more likely fail than not. But Larry and Sergey were really the only people who were talking about trying to build a Fortune 500 company. So my math kind of went, well, look, how many people get a chance to be in the first 10 people or so? Because when I first interviewed, there were only 7 of them. So I said, okay, well, not many people get to be in the first 10 of a Fortune 500 company. Might as well give it a shot. But also, I think I'm going to learn more being at Google, understanding how you try to build a company like that, than I will giving advice from a management consulting firm or the like. And I should also add, so after I blew off Google because Eric Roberts couldn't remember the name in September, fast forward, I'd gotten 13 job offers, and it was after spring break, and I was like, you just have to decide, you just have to pick one. And I was in a long distance relationship at the time, and I was in my dorm room late on a Friday night. And I just was like, if any other recruiters mail you, just have to delete. You have to choose from the 13 options you already have. And I remember it was like, I was eating a bowl of pasta that was just awful. And I was like you're just pathetic. You've hit rock bottom. You're sitting here by yourself in your dorm room at like 11 o'clock at night eating like horrible pasta. And I've always loved Pine as like my favorite email client, probably now second to Gmail, where spacebar actually opens the messages. And so I hit the spacebar kind of in disgust with my hand as I was kind of just looking at this pasta, and it opened a message from Salar Kamangar. And I thought it was kind of a form letter email. And when I opened it, the first paragraph was, we've been talking to professors at Stanford about who's graduating that we should be talking to. Your name came up. So I broke my rule. I hit reply, and I said, I'm interested in what you're doing, but I promised myself I'd make a decision by May 1st for my job. So I can interview, but I have to interview like right now. And so I went in that next Tuesday. That was a Friday night. I went in the next Tuesday. I met with Larry and Sergey, and then Sergey grilled me on k-means clustering and other things from my master's. And then they got up to leave, and I heard a big hullabaloo outside the door, especially from a small company, and it just sounded like lots of people were filing out and milling around. And I think I remember saying something like, guys, it's time to go to Kleiner. And then Heather, our receptionist, walked in and said, I'm sorry, I know it was really important to you to get your interviews all completed today, but Larry and Sergey just went to a pitch, and the whole company kind of went with them. So there's no one left here to interview you. So you'll have to come back tomorrow. So I was sent home and came back the next day to finish out my interviews, and then got an offer. And then from there kind of went through the process of choosing Google.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing that. So we have Salah to thank.
Salah and really bad pasta. Yeah.
That pasta. Thank you. So could you share from your time from Google to going to Yahoo and now Sunshine? Please share the journey that you've been on over the past couple of decades.
Yeah. So I started at Google as a software engineer. My early work was on classification systems. I was working on query classification for the purposes of ads. It's kind of funny to think about now, but as we were getting started, our early salespeople were very skeptical about whether or not you could sell ads by keyword. There just weren't enough searches, it wasn't dense enough, and they felt that the keywords would almost certainly have to be classified into a hierarchy of categories, a la Yahoo, in order to be sold, because advertisers were used to buying ads by category, not by keyword. So we did both. We basically built an ad system that could do keyword-based targeting, but could also take those keywords and aggregate them up to understand that if someone types, 49ers, that gets classified into the football sports. And so I spent the first summer building that out. We actually launched for a long time Google Ads. There were 2 on top, one that was keyword-based, one that was category-based based on that classification work that I had done. In that fall, continued to work on the ad system, was lucky enough to work with our original team of 3 was Jeff Dean, Howard Gobioff, and me working on the ad system. And then everyone was getting really irritated about the user interface. And there would be on the original Googler's MISC, which existed from pretty much when I started the company on, people would be like, why is our font serifed? Why is it spaced like this? Why does it look like that? And everyone would get really upset, and they would, be really upset, and they would propose all these changes, and everyone would be like, yeah, that'd be so much better. And then nothing would happen. And so we had been trying to find a UI engineer or an HCI engineer who would do 1 day a week on UI and do 4 days a week on systems. And we tried to hire that person for 2 or 3 months, and it just didn't happen. And then at some point, Huxley pulled me into his office and said, look, I've looked through all the resumes of all the engineers. You have this weird degree in symbolic systems, which was my undergraduate at Stanford. It has a cognitive psychology component. So I think you have some background in terms of how people might perceive the interface. Could you start spending like a half a day or a day on UI, and the rest of the time keep working on your AI classification system? So, and then I remember on my way out the door, Urs said, oh, and one more thing. He's like, what we don't want is more opinions. We want data. So I have to say, I probably took that to an extreme, because as the interface evolved over the years, we remained really tied to trying to make database decisions as opposed to making opinion-based decisions, largely because I wasn't necessarily trained in UI design or HCI, had some basic foundation in it, but we were lucky enough to have a large user base that could drive a large and growing user base that could drive a lot of the decisions based on data. So did some work there as a UI engineer, started working on the Google Web Server known as GWIS, and then did that on different teams. Google One Box, the results that show up on the top of the screen, that later became Universal Search. Worked on Google Directory, worked on just a lot of different search-related pieces over that time. Then the company had gotten big enough, and we were launching enough features that Jen Fitzpatrick, who now runs, I think, Maps still at the company, and I started a launch engineer function. I don't know if that still exists either. It was helpful at the time. At times it was controversial as being too bureaucratic. So Jen and I would get brought back in over the course of our time there to eventually pare it back and have it not get in the way of launches too much, but actually having an engineer who'd launched lots of things and knew how to put something into production, helping out the team as they launched things. So Jen and I played that role and trained up other launch engineers as well. So that was kind of on the side of the core software engineering we were doing. And then in summer of, I think it must have been 2002. So after about 3 years as a software engineer, switched over into product management. So I became a product manager. One of my first products was, in terms of launching, was Google News. But I also, there were 3 of us. It was basically Susan, who was working on, at the time, partnerships. So like our partnership with Yahoo, our partnership with AOL, as well as some smaller ones with Washington Post and the like. Salar, who was doing advertising, and I was doing everything consumer facing. So moved over into product management. After about a year of PMing the consumer side of the web, realized that we hired in Jonathan Rosenberg. He was busy trying to hire experienced product managers from the outside, and failing miserably. So Wayne Rosing was hiring about 8 engineers a week into engineering, and we were hiring 1 PM every 2 months. And so, the 64-to-1 ratio just doesn't scale. So at some point I went to Jonathan and made a bet. And I said, I think I can grow new product managers that work better in the Google way than you can hire experienced ones from the outside. And I want to bet you that I can. And he was like, that's fine, but I still have to go to eStaff and represent your hires. So you have to tell me what you're going to do. And I was like, don't worry about it. And he was like, no, seriously, what are you going to do? And I was like, well, look, I'm going to go to some of the best computer science programs in the country. I'm going to look for people who understand how to apply technology, and are really great computer scientists, could be Google software engineers, and then give them really big jobs and mentoring until they can become the kind of product managers that Google needs. So that was the genesis of the APM program, which I ran on the side of my core job for the remainder of the time. So about another 10 years while I was at Google. I'm always really fond of on my APMs. I think in total I hired 239 of them while I was at Google, and I still view them all, like I go to their weddings, I buy their kids' presents. Like I feel like they're kind of like my work kids. And some of them have gone on to do just really great and impressive things. Very, very proud of the program and of the people in it. And along that time, continued to manage core search. At some point, I was also managing Gmail and Toolbar. In fact, my first APM hire, Brian Rakowski, when he came in, I said, okay, I have to get focused on all the search stuff. So I'm gonna have you do Gmail. And so we did, so he took over Gmail. And so the kind of the communication stuff moved into a group that was called at first CCC, communications, collaborations, and community. And I continued to work on search, working on everything from like Google Finance, Google News, eventually Google Maps. And then Universal Search, iGoogle, and I continued on in search until 2010, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a precursor to Eric departing the CEO role. In the fall of 2010, Eric, Larry, and Sergey approached me and said, we've always run the company functionally. We want to see if we can run the company divisionally with GMs rather than with functional leaders. So we're wondering if you would be willing to move over to Maps, Geo, and Local and basically manage not only the product side of things, because I'd always been on the product management side working with engineering, but manage product management, marketing, and with a dedicated finance and sales finance and legal leader. And so I moved over to Maps to do that in 2010. We bought Zagat. We got ready. I left Google right before we were going to launch Google Maps for mobile, and I got some fun stories about that. But when I was in June of 2012, I was approached by Yahoo about interviewing for the CEO role. And as much as I loved Google and I had no desire to leave, and it was a particularly poorly timed because I was about halfway through a pregnancy. My first pregnancy, and I hadn't really disclosed it to anyone yet. I went and interviewed for the Yahoo role because when I made the change from Google Search to Google Maps, what I found was I had started learning again, and I really enjoyed being able to work on a new product and really getting a chance to learn new things. Why is aerial imagery in Sweden 6 times as expensive as it is in Norway? The answer is cloud cover. Finding out all kinds of fascinating things like that through my GM role on Maps. And so I kind of was excited to learn on an even bigger scale. And so Yahoo is a company that had been really formative to Google, had a lot of respect for it, had a lot of compassion for it about the hard times they had been through. But my PR business partner came into my office and said, when Yahoo let go of Carol Bartz in September, said, Yahoo CEO, like you should go for it. It's mail, it's maps, it's stock quotes, it's news, it's search, it's everything you've ever worked on in a different context. Like you should do this. I was like, absolutely not. Like that board is so confused. Like, are they selling the company? Are they partnering with Microsoft? Like, what are they doing? And said no. And I didn't actually pursue it at that time. And the board went on to hire Scott Thompson. Fast forward 5 months after that, Scott Thompson left, and then the role came back to me again. That time I was approached to actually interview for it and did, and then transitioned to Yahoo in 2012 in July. And I spent 5 years at Yahoo, very proud of the team that we built there and the product transformation, but had both the blessing and the curse of $1 billion Alibaba investment that had turned into somewhere, depending on what fraction of it was sold pre-IPO, $40 to $100 billion stake. So while the Yahoo core business was worth somewhere on the order of, $5 to $15 billion, we had this large Alibaba stake, which also managed to attract a lot of activist investors. And I compared my CEO job in terms of managing shareholders to keeping 2 cats in a bag. I was like, there's one smaller cat that cares a lot about the Yahoo operating business and the internet business. There's another cat that cares a lot more about the cash coming back from the Alibaba stake. And at some point we knew that we would have to disentangle the 2 assets. So at the end of my tenure there, it was really, basically when I got there, Yahoo had no mobile. They had 30 engineers that were working on mobile. Everything was done in HTML5. There was no native code. They were still building for Microsoft and BlackBerry, in addition to Android and iOS. And so, the big transformation I undertook there was building mobile from an $11 million business to just over $1 billion business, and taking us from 600 million users to over 1 billion users. But at the end of it, we knew that we had transformed the company, we transformed the product, and had started to grow users. But ultimately, we weren't going to achieve the type of growth that Google and Facebook were demonstrating. So it made sense, since we couldn't execute a tax-free spinoff, to sell the core business. So sold the core business to Verizon. At that point, it didn't make sense for me to stay on, nor did I want to. So I left, and about a year after that, I founded Sunshine. So I've been here working away on Sunshine for the last 6 years. Thank you to our investor who introduced himself earlier. And it's been a terrific experience. I have been at a startup before. Obviously, I was at Google when it was a startup, but it's been really exhilarating. And we're focused on taking the mundane and making it magical. And what I mean by that is my entire career has been defined by consumer technology. It's been defined by consumer technology that people use in small bursts, email, search, lots of times a day, as opposed to long dedicated, periods of time, or, tasks that you only do a few times in a lifetime. And so I like to work on everyday problems. And given my background in AI, both my degrees from Stanford are in AI, have been really fascinated and exhilarated by the transformation of AI and the way it's taking over the industry. And it has really captured everyone's imagination. So what I'm trying to do is take AI and place it in everyday apps in a way that benefits the user and also makes it really tangible and not scary. So I'm very much in the case of a tech optimist, as opposed to a doomer, as they would say. And so, I think that, I originally came from Wisconsin. I feel very in touch with my roots and in touch with the average consumer, certainly in this country. And I really think that if you talk to those people, they think that AI is terrifying. So what I'm trying to do here, in addition to building a really big business and successful, thriving company, is also trying to do things that demystify AI and show them the value of it.
I feel like you should have your own weekly podcast about this mystifying AI. There's so much need for that these days, right? Before we go into Shine and Sunshine and getting you to do the product demo, would love to actually get you to dig in deeper about APMs.
Sure.
So many, the biggest tech companies have followed your lead to launch APM programs all around Silicon Valley and frankly the world. Did you know it would be such a successful program? What did you do specifically to?
As I said, it's funny and it's humbling. And actually, I interviewed someone last week, and they were like also interviewing at the Google APM program, and I was like, oh, like I founded the APM program, and it was the first of its kind in the industry. So I kind of helped invent APM programs, or right, like, since it was kind of just me needing help, like I did invent them, and like the person was like, no, you must be mistaken. Like, and I was like, actually, like I was there when we like invented the term associate product manager and APM. And interestingly, it kind of came from my my offer at McKinsey that I was taking in. The whole idea was, McKinsey had associates who were new college grads. They put them through rotations and exposed them to lots of different things and clients. And a McKinsey analyst or associate role is an upper out role. And so I was like, that's what we're going to try and do here. We're going to get people in. We're going to put them in big jobs, help them grow into those jobs, and then rotate them so they see different parts of the business. And if they're successful, promote them up. Otherwise, let them go. And as I said, when we started it was out of necessity. Honestly, it was out of frustration. Jonathan, now we can laugh about it, but he had been there for 4 months. He had hired two product managers, Pearl Reniker and John Piscatello. And he had given John to Salar as a second APM on ads. And he had given Pearl Reniker to Susan to help her on partnerships. So then I went and I said, okay, like when am I getting my PM reinforcement? Because I'm managing 14 consumer products and I'm starting to have a context switching problem. And he said, oh, well, And it was funny because Jonathan, of course, was quite new to Google at the time, but he was like, you'll get product managers when you have revenue. And I was like outraged. Right? Like I was like, I don't think you understand how this works. Like the only reason we have advertisers is because like we have consumers coming to our site searching all the time. Like if we don't keep the consumers happy, like there is no revenue. Like this isn't about like the ad tools making the advertisers happier. This is about like the advertisers being happy with the traffic and the placements they're getting on our search result pages. And so it was during that conversation where I just got so frustrated where he told me I wouldn't get any product managers until there was revenue. He's like, product managers have to manage business lines. And like, what's the business line associated with consumer here? He's like, it's really with ads. And I was like, well, it's a complicated ecosystem because yes, there's ad tools as we're the advertiser, but the tools that really matter in this equation are the consumer tools. I was like, look, if you're not going to hire anyone and give anyone to me for the consumer side of it, I want to be able to hire my own. And I was like, I'll hire inexpensive, inexperienced people who I think can do a really great job. And that's when we kind of had that bet. So when I founded it, it was really out of necessity. And then I went out and hired that first year 7 people. They were all Stanford and MIT. Those were the only 2 people that those were the only 2 colleges I recruited from. Because remember, I wasn't a full-time recruiter, right? I was working like 80 hours a week on the 14 consumer products at Google that I was running, including Google.com and web search and all these big pieces. And so I needed overall help. And once Eric looked at the people, and at that time, the final interview wasn't with me for the APM program, it was with Larry and Sergey. Larry was obviously very committed to product, and Sergey, they shared an office. So when we had an APM that we felt like could get hired, they would do the interview to see how they felt about their product sensibilities. And so as a result, like the program was reasonably visible, and the people we were hiring were reasonably visible, and they were amazing. Brian Rakowski, I think now it runs, basically product for Chrome and Android. The 7th of the 7 that I hired was Brett Taylor, who went on to become CTO of Facebook and CEO of Salesforce, multi-time successful entrepreneur. And Eric said, look, I think that you're hiring the person who will eventually run the company. We just don't know which one. And so he's like, we want to make sure that we give these people really big jobs and the mentoring that they need. And, what you're building here may be the biggest legacy you give to the company, because if it works, these people some of them will stay, some of them will go. But, they're going to spread this way of doing product management and the kinds of insights that we're building in how you build products here at Google across the industry. And I have to say, as a relatively young person and an experienced person at the time, because I guess it was 2002, so I was like 26 or 27 years old. I was only about 5 years older than the APMs, and they were kind of built in the model of Salar and me. Because we too were hired as NCGs, and Larry and Sergey just gave us really big responsibilities and yelled at us until we became the people they needed us to become. And so I just thought it was really, I couldn't see how important it would ultimately become. But both Eric and Jonathan said, this could be the biggest thing that you do. And I definitely don't know if it was the biggest thing I did at Google, but it was definitely something I'm very proud of, and it's among the biggest things and the biggest impacts. And by the time we got to 2010, 2011, 2012, and I left for Yahoo, pretty much every unicorn in Silicon Valley had a product manager that had been an APM. Uber's first PM, Meena Radhakrishnan, was one of my APMs. Dropbox, the entire first 4 people they hired into their product team were APMs. Airbnb, the list goes on and on. There was basically an APM installed at pretty much every name recognizable consumer tech company in Silicon Valley. And now, of course, all those places have APM programs, which is why I think it's so funny now when I talk to someone, they're like, well, I'm interviewing at these APM programs. And I was like, pretty familiar with those. Yeah.
That's incredible. But one more question on the APM program before we go to the product demo. This is so fascinating how you've such a big impact. We know what Brett Taylor's doing these days, right? And everyone else around who've been APMs. What did you do on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis with such young talent? We all need to hire young talent, foster them. So, and it can be very difficult. Was there anything you did specifically?
In terms of what I did for the APMs or what I was doing in my day job?
With the APMs to make sure you help shape their careers in the product.
A couple of things. So, I will say, I don't mean that facetiously, but a lot of what I did with the APMs was after 6 o'clock and on weekends. So there were things where like we were always recruiting for the next year. And we used to, it was prior, in some of these years, it was prior to social networking or LinkedIn. So one of the things that I was annoyed by was Brett Taylor arrived in February of 2003. And he was like, look, I've heard about this APM program. At the time, it was only like 6 people. I was like, how flattered he called it a program. And he was like, he's like, I've heard about this APM program, and I think I find it really interesting. Like, could I interview you for it? I was like, sure. And I looked up his background, and Brett was the Ford Scholar from Stanford, which is the distinction given to the #1 computer science graduate at Stanford. So I was like, well, that's amazing. But then I went down, and my good friend, I'm a recruiter, who was the recruiter for the APM program throughout, Jeff Ferguson, I was like, what are you doing? Like literally the #1 graduate from Stanford just knocked on our door 8 months after graduating, asking to be considered. Like, what's going on? I'm like, this is like a huge miss. And what it did, it gave rise to something we called the sourcing party. So we would do sourcing parties. They started at 6 o'clock. They'd go however long, and we basically be like, look, we're going to map the graduating classes of every top school. So we'd name like the top 5 or 6 schools, and then we would just methodically map everyone who was graduating from MIT, everyone who's graduating from Stanford, through the combination of student groups and web searches and the like, and reach out to them and get the best of the best. And we always did things like that, and also built culture and community. We had monthly meetings with the APMs where they shared best practices. And I was like, I refuse to schedule professional development for you. If I schedule professional development, it's going to be like Dilbert, and you're going to be all sitting there on your laptops the whole time, not paying any attention. You need to schedule your own professional development. And so each APM would take a month and schedule professional development that they thought would be really compelling. And it became kind of a fun game of one-upsmanship. Could you come up with a more interesting and compelling professional development opportunity than the person did the last month in APM training? And so they got like the person who taught the negotiating class at Microsoft to come in and teach them. They had like professional poker players come in and teach them. They had Edward Tufte. They wrote to Edward Tufte and asked if he would come and give a talk about presentations. And so they went big, and it meant that the APM trainings were always really compelling. And we actually had other groups and other divisions, engineers, et cetera, who wanted to join them. We also, it was very unconventional, we put in place management coaching from the very get-go. So I had the legendary management coach, Bill Campbell, took me under his wing, and he was really helpful in my process. And I was like, I can't imagine trying to do what I had been asked to do and evolve in the way I had been asked to evolve without a management coach. So I was like, I think we really need management coaching there. And so met Maureen Taylor from SNP, and she basically staffed 5 management coaches who were paired up with different people. And I think they still do this today. So each APM gets about a half an hour of management coaching every week or two. And it might seem kind of strange, but it was, they're coming in, they have to win over, and influence engineers 20 years more senior and experienced than them. And so we'd always be like, look, go in, take notes, be helpful, gather data, try to pull together consensus views. And it was helpful sometimes because people would be like, I disagree with my tech lead. And I'm about to send this email, but I think it's going to get nasty. And like, it was, you'd find things. I found that, especially inexperienced people at the beginning of their career, sometimes don't have the best judgment on how to approach a conflict, and just having to, and they also are self-conscious about talking these kinds of things through with their manager, because it ultimately affects their career trajectory. So, the APMs are wanting to say like, I sent this to my tech lead, and now like, we're kind of not talking, or we're kind of really upset with each other, and really talk through like, what are the next steps? How do you work through that? And should you even have sent the email in the first place? So we always had the APMs have management coaching. We always would tell them to come to their management coaching session with a real life example of something that they were considering or struggling with at that time, as opposed to more theoretical. And I think that helped a lot. And the final thing is on the rotations, it was really hard to do rotations because basically everyone would get really attached to their very talented APM, and we would get to June every year, and everyone would be like, you're not rotating, like we're keeping you. And I'd be like, no, 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 no. Like the associate in product management means like associate might as well just be rotational. These are rotational product managers, right? They're like kind of synonyms in this. So I'll give you someone new, but like this person's going to rotate and you're going to get someone new, and you might get a second year APM or you might get a first year APM, but like they have to rotate. And so there was the whole process of having the managers be willing to do rotations, but I would sit down each May, and basically it was most of my May weekends. I would have the APMs come in and we would sit down for a half an hour to an hour long rotational discussion, where basically I would try and understand what they had been doing, what they liked about it, what they had learned from it, and what they wanted to do the next year. So I would have them basically complete the Mad Lib or the fill in the blank. Right now I'm doing X. Next, I'd like to do Y. And by making this change, I'll learn Z, right? So it might be like, right now I'm working on search. Next, I'm going to work on ads. And by making this change, I'm going to learn the difference between B2C and B2B, right? Or I'm working on this and now I'm working on that. And I'm going to learn now how two nascent products are both alike, or how a nascent product compares to a mature product. So as long as they could explain to me why they wanted to make the change they wanted to make and what they were going to learn from it, we generally tried to honor it. So then it was almost like a med school match. APMs, we'd have, the 40 to 80 roles that were available to APMs. And the managers would kind of rank the APMs they wanted. The APMs would rank the roles they wanted. And we tried to make sure that everyone got one of their top 3 in both directions. And then we would go on the APM trip, which came about the very first year, about 1 year in. And I was like, okay, I think it actually really would help us to get out into other geographies and learn more about how Google works in other places. And so the APM trip is a nice punctuation, because it kind of is at the end of their first year. They all go somewhere for 2 weeks, and when they come back, it's time to do the next rotation. And we also talked a lot and provided a lot of coaching for transitions. How long is a too long transition? How long is a good transition? But I would basically say, it's really basically 4 weeks. First, you go and shadow the other person. What are they doing? Watch them. The next, weeks 3 and 4, you do the job. They watch you and give you feedback. After that, you know where to find them. And also preparing them for things like, for the month when you're transitioning, it might feel like you have less work because, whenever you take on a new job, it's a slower start and you're kind of working at a slower pace. But I was like, actually, it's the opposite, because you're doing your current job, you're teaching the new successor for you, and you're learning your new job. So it's really like, 2 to 3x the amount of work during those transition months. So rotations, management, coaching, professional development that they really took ownership of, sourcing priorities and really having them have a big voice in recruiting and really making sure we were finding the best possible people for the program. Those were all important ingredients.
Awesome. Thank you, Marissa. Well, let's talk about Shine. You really recently launched this product on Sunshine photo sharing app. Let's do a product demo, and we can ask more questions along those lines once you've provided that.
Okay, let me just get the screen share going here. Okay. So about 2 months ago, we launched Shine, which is a few different things, but the core of it is photo sharing. And so this is my Shine app. Shine right now allows you to share photos that are taken at a particular event, a time and a place, and are defined like that. So we have overall a feed. You can comment and do things like comment and do emojis. We also have the albums page, so you can see all the different albums that you're a part of. This is obviously my personal Shine. And we also have the suggested albums, where these are new albums you might want to start and share. What I thought I would do here to give you an idea of sort of how these are structured is I'm going to create a new album. So it doesn't like the word Xoogler, I guess. So I'll do a Xoogler chat. I'm going to place it here at my office. We do use Google Maps API for this. And I'm going to say, okay, let's have it run from, anytime from 5 to 10 tonight, even though it won't necessarily be that long. And I'll create that album. We have 2 different modes. So you can explicitly put photos up into the album, but you can also go through magic mode. And what magic mode means is we detect, based on the metadata, where the photos were taken. We also look at various share-worthy attributes, whether or not this is a photo that we think you're likely to want to share or not. And I trust Shine, so I'm going to go ahead and do magic mode for mine. And then you can go ahead and invite other people. So I'll go ahead and invite some of the folks here from Sunshine. We obviously do a lot of testing, so they're all kind of on top. And go ahead and invite them. We can also do it through a link or a QR code, etc. And so now any photos that they take outside here in the office will start to populate into this album. So we'll see and wait for that to happen. But if you kind of look at different apps, different things that we have, like I was going to show a few different things. I went on a ski trip for Ski Week this year, and we pull together albums. The nice thing here is you don't have to stop and say, wait, what do I need to share, right? Any photos that are taken in Teton Village or Jackson Hole that week automatically get shared if they're share worthy. And the other thing that we're doing is we're clustering near duplicates. It's a lot like Stacks, as I understand it, in Google Photos. That said, we think that we have an even better algorithm for clustering as well as for figuring out the key photos. So you can get an overall sense. It's a really nicely diverse album, lots of different contributors to it. And it gives you, and it's something where, people after just a few taps basically created this entire album with almost no effort. And I'll show this in a second. As part of this, well, the focus is on photo sharing, and in particular photo sharing across iPhones and Android, because we think that's really broken. And we just launched the Shine app on Android yesterday. So it's now available in the Google Play Store. So we think it's really hard to actually share across the platforms. And I would say that the overall focus here is, we think Instagram is great if you're trying to share a photo with, everyone, whether you know them or not. If you want to just text a photo to a friend or a family member, one-to-one text works well. But if you're working on 10 to 50 people, photo sharing is really a pain. It's hard to get everyone on the app. When you're dealing with 10 to 50 people, you're going to have people who are on both Android and on iOS. And so it's really helpful to have a way where that just happens and doesn't require a lot of time, doesn't require a lot of pinching and zooming on your part, to actually figure out which photo is the best. But yeah, so you can see they're outside there pulling together all kinds of different photos of who's out there. And they just came and took a picture of me too. So you get the idea. They're just shooting pictures, and because we think they're share worthy, because they have people in them, they just automatically get uploaded. And coming soon, right now, this is on our test flight version, we do have facial recognition. So now we can recognize that when I clicked all those invites, I didn't invite Allie. There's an oversight on my part, but it sees that Allie is in the pictures and reminds me, go ahead and share this with Allie. She's in these pictures too, and she seems to be in this group. The other piece that I was going to talk about earlier is we have, photo sharing is the center of what we're doing. We also have an events platform. So I'm going to switch off of this in a second and show that. But we know that when people are about to attend or host an event, people are going to get together, they're going to want to share photos. And so we basically have an event platform that nicely integrates generative AI that acts as lead gen for photos. Essentially, we know that we can have, the 20 people who are invited to that event all join the album, all join Shine, and then can start sharing photos for that and for other things. And so this is, for example, my mother-in-law turned 80. This is an example of, what the albums from that weekend look like, different events celebrating her 80th. It nicely dovetailed in. The great thing here is when people RSVP for the event, they're immediately joined to the photo album. So once you've RSVP'd yes for an event, you don't need to get the Google Photos link afterwards, get the Apple Photos or iPhoto sharing. You don't need to have the tag on with paperless post or the like. It's built-in photo sharing from the beginning. So I'm going to transition off of my phone and I can show you the events piece.
Great. Well, you're doing the transition, Marissa. What kind of feedback would you be looking for from quite a few of the 100 plus people who are watching this live, but also people in the recording? Are you looking for specific product feedback right now with Shine?
Sure, we are. What I really love is people to try it out and use it. One of the things we always notice, from a product standpoint, is when you're using it, test use cases are always very misleading. Actual use cases, actual events you're hosting, actual things you're doing, trips you're going on. We found that Shine for photos is particularly good for trips and just kind of more casual hangouts. And so using it and giving us feedback. Right now, we've definitely in the end of March launched an MVP. We've been launching new features every week, so it gets a little bit more feature rich every week, but we're always looking for input on how to make it better because it's still very much in that nascent fledgling phase. So
and is there a preferred way you want to hear the feedback from folks who tried and want to share more?
Sure, you can mail me at Marissa@Sunshine. That probably is the easiest.
Cool. Thank you.
So this is Shine. So you can see I got some test events that we were doing for different things, but a lot of these are actually real events. My mom's turning 75. There's some some parties for my kids' school here, different dinners and things I'm hosting for people, but you can get an idea. These are all generative AI images. And they, as I said, keep track of RSVPs. It's as fully featured as Partyful or Paperless Post or Evite. But the nice thing is it has the built-in photo sharing. And to create an invite, we've evolved it to being as simple as basically filling out this Mad Lib or fill in the blank. But if I said, like, what if we did a Xoogler chat with Sergey? And the location will be on Zoom. It probably is going to want a physical location because we like physical locations for this. Let's say it's going to be next week. And the theme is, we'll say like a campfire. And so now what we're doing is we're going and I don't know exactly how well this will work out. That's the fun part about live demos. But we're building an invite, sort of generating the image, and we're also generating the introductory paragraph text. Oh, there we go. So it basically came up with this nice campfire. We've got live video backgrounds here in the background, and then it had ChatGPT write this saying, gather on the virtual flames, right, for a campfire themed chat with Google luminary Sergey.
Just paid
so,
OpenAI some money.
Chris does a better job writing these descriptions, but this wouldn't be a bad starting point for you to edit and ultimately send out. And then when you save it, and this ties back in, I'll talk a little bit about where we are with Sunshine contacts and birthdays. But when you save it, you can go and it doesn't like my Google Map location. So if I just put this one here at Emerson as well, that works. So I'll save it. But then it's pulling in my Sunshine contacts. So if you've onboarded onto Sunshine contacts, onto Sunshine birthdays, and now the Shine app itself imports your contacts, those contacts are all available here for you to use. You can also upload a list, a CSV. You can also just share a link to the event. But it can do an easy autocomplete, right? So it can find, for example, my husband, other folks from Google, like if I try and find Craig Silverstein or Craig Neville Manning, they're all here and I can just go ahead and keep adding them. So really easy way, and it ties back to that history that we have of contacts. So where we are in our first two products and over the past 6 years is we first started out, we basically want to build something that acts like a personal CRM, but nobody really wants a CRM, even professionally. I think it was kind of interesting. I was pretty critical of Brett when he bought Slack at Salesforce. I was like, I don't get it. And like I wasn't ever really able to justify it very well to me, but someone else did, and they basically said, look, CRMs are awful. Even people who make their lives and their quotas off of them do all their recording on their CRM in the last 3 days of the quarter. And so Salesforce is buying Slack because it's an interface that people want to sit on. And that's what they ultimately need. They need that kind of consistent, that consistent engagement. And that really resonated with me. So I was like, well, but that's a challenge because we're trying to build a personal CRM, and people, when it's their job and they're paid to do it, don't even like to use CRMs. You can't really launch a personal CRM that has a CRM-like interface. You have to meet people in the everyday apps they're using all the time: contacts, calendar, email, photos, events, groups, chats, to try and understand what's going on overall with their life. And so when we mapped that, all the different things we were interested in, contacts really stood out as something that was foundational. We're like, look, if you invite someone to a group or you invite someone to an event and they don't get it, you're no more thoughtful than if you hadn't invited them at all. So one of the problems with contacts is we found that about 19% of contacts are stale. If you go to use the contact right now in your phone book, it won't work, won't reach the person. That contact's no good anymore. And contacts have been a traditionally very static thing. You get them, they don't change. So the person changes jobs, changes preferred email addresses or cell phone numbers, you just lose contact with them. So we were like, look, we want to create a system where contacts automatically update, where if you have my business email from before and I moved different jobs, like now you have my new business email, things like that. And we're pretty proud of what we built for Sunshine Contacts. It's in the App Store. It's the highest rated contact manager in the App Store. And along the way, we also, when we were studying contacts and doing our user studies, the kind of funny thing that would happen is people would just bash on Facebook. I know Xoogler's all love to hear that. But you'd be like sitting there trying to talk to them about the product you were working on. And they'd be like, but I really hate Facebook. And like all roads would lead to Facebook. And I'd be like, we're not talking about Facebook. Like, let's talk about contacts. And then like they'd work back to Facebook again. And like finally, like the third time they do this, and I bet this happened probably about 60 times to me as I was doing these different user interviews. I'd be like, okay, fine, I'll bite. Like, if you hate Facebook this much, like, why are you still on it? And I would say about 2/3 of the time, people would be like, birthdays. And so along the way, we did a little NCG project where we took 3 new college grads and said, look, build a little app that scrapes Facebook birthdays, goes to your calendar, parses it, and creates a birthday reminder app for people. And so we built Sunshine Birthdays along the way. Sunshine Birthdays also is the highest rated in this category and it's done really well. The issue that we ran into at this time last year with both contacts and birthdays, well, we're really proud of them. We'll leave them in the App Store. We also have both of them in the Android store as well, is there's no virality. No one ever says, oh my gosh, my contact manager is so amazing, you just have to try it. Like no one ever says that. And also every day we save hundreds, if not thousands of people from forgetting a birthday, but nobody ever posts on social like, oh my gosh, I almost forgot my grandma's birthday and this app totally saved me, because grandma will see it or your cousins will see it and they'll tell grandma. So what we basically found was there was almost no word of mouth. Every user we got was just that one user, and that multiplicative effect that you want of you get a user, and by virtue of the fact that you got that user, you get 5 to 20 more, just wasn't present. So we started looking at what else was in the original problem space we wanted to work on that would build on contacts, but have that kind of virality, which is when we started really thinking a lot about photos and events, which were 2 things we had been passionate about throughout our time at Sunshine, and both of which, as you can see, have natural tie-ins with contacts, with facial recognition. And so, and really leverage the really strong foundation we have in contacts and contact management, because I do think our deduplication, our merging, our updating of information is pretty much among the best out there. And I would also say the other thing along the way that ties to Google is we've had OAuth authorization for Gmail throughout the time we've had contacts in the market. And that has been, really transformational in terms of what we're able to do for contacts, because we can see, even if you don't have that person's email, we can see this person sending a lot more from their Gmail than they are from their Yahoo Mail, because we can see overall when they're sending and receiving email messages, even from the other users who are Gmail OAuth in. And we do things like parse the email, parse the signature, and realize, okay, this person doesn't work at Facebook anymore. And now they work at Google, and we can see that from their signature and update their contact card accordingly and notify people. We don't just give them the information, but notify people. We think that this information you have is obsolete and you should request new information from that person. So overall, still, as I said, very proud of those apps, and the foundation we have is really strong to build photos and events on. But we've pivoted in the last year to really being more focused on photos with a desire to come back to contacts and that broader relationship management goal in the end.
On the point of building a product, Israel, why don't you unmute and ask your question?
Hi, Marissa. Thank you so much for this. It's really interesting from the first early Google days to Shine. So thank you.
I'm sorry, it's
My
very
question
early
was,
for you. So I'm thank you for being up so
oh,
late.
I'm in San Francisco. I'm in Glen Park right
Okay.
here. Yeah, my question is actually, building at Google kind of in a large scale and in Yahoo versus building in a startup world where you have to kind of get the word out. And you alluded to the K factor there as a concern yourself with virality. How do you see it different, specifically on how do you build a product and how you think about marketing, which is something we had to concern ourselves a little less when we were at Google, kind of put the
I have to
PR
say
out
that
there.
couple of thoughts here. I think that I've always been very user focused. I mean, I really do feel that mantra that we have at Google of putting the user first is really where my heart always is. And so it was funny, before I got married in my early 30s, I was very much the career girl, running Google search, etc. My mom made this comment because one of my friends said like, oh, like 4 is just the best age. And my mom commented after my friend had left and said, I always feel bad for people who declare like a favorite age of their children, because eventually you don't have a 4-year-old, like you have a 5-year-old. And she's like, I have to say, I loved all the phases of my children. She's like, I loved them all equally. I thought they were all terrific. And I said, Mom, I don't have children, but I think I love all phases of companies. I like it when they're single digits, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. I like it when they're in hyper growth. I like it when they're in decline and you're trying to turn them around. I was like, I just find companies so fascinating. I just think there's such a rich and interesting design space. I just like all phases of companies. And then I started my company. And then I discovered there's one phase of company that I really don't like, which is pre-product and market. I just found it incredibly challenging because I realized even though Google was incredibly early and incredibly ugly and didn't work that well when I joined, like we had a website that was live that people could use. And I could go and do a user study at Stanford University in the basement of the computer lab for, free pizza and t-shirts and say, and watch them use it and see how it was working and how it wasn't working for them. And so I do still love almost all phases of companies, but I find pre-product the most challenging. And so even if it's a small number of users, just having some number of users, to my point in my request earlier through Chris, who are using it in their actual everyday lives as opposed to hypothetical or test cases. I find that just for me and my product process and how to evolve and iterate a product is absolutely critical and crucial. And the other thing I'll say, tying together APMs and all of this, is my office mate, the founder of Gmail, Paul Buchheit, left Google and joined Y Combinator. And about a year after he left, I ran into him and he said, yeah, I said, oh, you're like busy hiring all my APMs to start companies for Y Combinator. And he's like, yeah, we got quite a few of them. And we were kind of jousting back and forth. And he said, they're pretty great. Like, you've hired some really great people. I was like, yeah, I know. I'm like, can you send them back over? And he was like, and he's like, but by the way, they all have this one really weird trait. And I was like, and he's like, this one weird quirk. And I was like, and he's like, that kind of gets in their way. And I was like, well, quick, tell me, like, what is that? So I can train them out of it and like kind of adjust what we do with them. And he's like, they worry a lot about success failure. He's like, you go into their board meetings and you go into their companies and they're like, well, we're going to launch and we're going to have like 100,000 people the first day. And like, are we provisioned for that? Are we ready for that? And he's like, in startups, like, that's not the problem you have. The problem is that you launch and like, no one cares. I'm like, no one comes, right? Like, he's like, that's the problem that startups have. Like this 100,000 users or like 5 million users, or if you're in the case of Threads and Facebook, like, 100 million users on the first day, like show up, like that's not the problem. So I do think that, there are sort of, weird privileges and advantages that you have inside of Google that can occasionally train weird muscle memory. And, that's one of those things, but I do find, for me, I love scale, and I definitely want Sunshine to be able to be operating on the type of scale that I've had previously in my career. That's the goal. And that's what we're working towards. But I don't need a lot of users. I do need some.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. We are out of time. Is there anything else you want to share with the Xoogler community, whether it's to be helping shine your company, whether you're hiring?
Yeah, so we are hiring. So if you are interested, or if you know people are interested, we're hiring in particular. And I know sometimes Googlers and Zooglers are not necessarily the best source of it, but we're looking intensely for iOS engineers. So if you know an iOS engineer or are someone who's done iOS and Swift, please send them my way. But we also need great backend and systems engineers. We have a really strong team here already, but we can always use more people. And I'm also hiring a chief of staff. Who will work on the G&A side of the company, as well as with a heavy dose focus on marketing and growth.
Incredible. And final question on that. Quick question about the culture at Sunshine. That's one. And two, are they all in-person roles in Palo Alto? Are they remote, or what the situation?
Sure. We are all in person in Palo Alto. We were obviously remote for the pandemic, but I have found that, and I've talked with a lot of CEOs of big companies, small companies, and people who've grown from 0 to big. And they're like, for the first 100 people or so, being remote really does slow you down. So right now, given our size and scale, we're just under 20 people. We really feel that we need to be in person mostly. That said, we are really understanding of work from away. You have to travel home and abroad in order to see family. Sure, go for a month, spend 2 of the weeks working remotely, that type of thing, to really make it worth your while. So we're pretty understanding of different circumstances, but we like most people to live in the Bay Area and be here. And I'm sorry, there was another question.
The question's about the culture at Sunshine.
Oh, the culture. We have, it's hard to have a company called Sunshine and not have it be fun and bright and uplifting. And so I think we're people here who we like to have a lot of fun. Now we're running events and photo sharing product, which that in of itself, like, you probably saw on some of my albums, each week we have like different activities, flower arranging, movies, painting, all these different things. So we're constantly, we're trying to organize events, understand how to do that better and how that can build our culture. We have an end of Friday meeting. It wasn't the happy hour that Google had, where we would set out beer, but no one would drink it. We go for ice cream in downtown Palo Alto instead. So we eat ice cream. And my view here is I really, Google was always filled with really nice people. When I got to Yahoo, it was also filled with really nice people, but not everyone on my board was nice. And Maureen, who I talked about from SNP, showed up one day when my activist investors were giving me a really hard time. And she had this amazing throw pillow just out here, but I don't have it with me right now, that said on it, "Be nice or leave." And she put it on the couch in my office and was like, "Let this be a message to your board." And that pillow came here, and I joke that it's kind of a litmus test, because people who aspire to be nice is really funny, but there's also there's an irony of it, because it's this really kind of bossy command, be nice or leave, that's not nice at all. And so for the people who can kind of comprehend and like kind of immediately get the humor, and yes, we want to be nice, and we're saying it in this way that isn't particularly nice, and that's funny. That's kind of gives you an idea of the sense of humor and the culture here.
Awesome. On that note,
we're in Palo Alto. We go out to lunch every day. It feels actually like a lot like the early days of Google, which was part of my hope.
Backend engineers, iOS engineers, chief of staff that's also tailored to marketing. We'll be sure to spread the word, Marissa. And thank you for educating all of us, not only on your career, but training young talent through the APM programs and also sharing more about Shine and your company. Congratulations, and we look forward to be helping you further and inviting you back to the Xoogler community to share your progress.
Thank you very much. It was really nice to spend time with you today, and thank you all for attending.
So we're joining everyone. See you soon.